Keep your sound down there. And we're live.
Welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. It's Tom Dutta here. It's Tom Dutta like butter. And we're live streaming today across LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Hey, if you're on the stream, you can chat with us in the chat room. And I've got my special guest in the green room. We'll bring him on in a minute. Very excited to bring this gentleman on because he's from a different part of the world. And I got a little surprise for you. We're going to be talking about his new book. First, let me just tell you a little bit about the bio. Now, when I asked him to send me his biography, there was some really interesting stuff in it. Let me try and read you a few things. His name's Robert New, N-E-W. And so when he was in high school, a dare escalated a little too quickly, and he made the state final in an interpretive dance competition. Okay, how's that for starting off with something different? Thankfully, his teacher was okay with him checking out of the main event, thus preserving his affection for education. Whilst not a direct consequence, he's since spent much of his life studying and is currently undertaking his 7th university degree. That in itself, everyone, is a story in a story. We'll get into that. And he's currently undertaking the 7th degree, which is in education, a PhD. His degrees in psychology, sociology, biology. I'm already feeling like he's analyzing me from the green room. But the thing about it is that the whole narrative behind his life apparently is this has infused or influenced his work. So we'll check that out. And finally, I think it was fascinating. He studied, I say this right, I hope, Wado-Ryu karate for 20 years. Ran his own dojo in Perth for several years. He's not currently training, but that in itself is fascinating. And he has a fear of something, and we'll get into that on the show. He said it freaks him out. So let me bring him on the screen here. Welcome to the show, Robert New.
Thank you. Very pleased to be here, Tom.
It's a wonderful technology. There's a bit of an accent there, so tell us, where do you live? And
I'm in Melbourne, Australia. So yes, the other part of the world.
Yeah. And everybody knows who have been here before in the show. I'm the west coast of Canada, British Columbia, where we're actually today having something called an atmospheric river. If you ever heard of this, enough rain, 200 milliliters in a couple of days to cause massive flooding in different parts. Just the world's changing. But welcome. Now, off in the green room, you were telling me you were originally, I think England was in the picture.
Yes. So I was born prematurely. So I was born at 29 weeks. So that sort of, started my world. I had a less than 5% chance of surviving. But then my family, when I was about 9 months old, moved back to England. My dad's English, my mum's Dutch. So my dad was out in Melbourne on a 3-year work placement, and so during that time, my sister and myself were born, and so then the placement ended, so we moved back to England, but almost immediately started planning to try and move back to Australia because they loved their time here, and wound up emigrating when I was about 3, moved back to Australia. So I spent nearly all my life in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Did spend a few years living over in Perth too.
Well, that's fascinating. We're going to do a segment on the show today called Plato's Garden, and I haven't told you about that in detail, but we'll get into that and something called the influencers of your public work. And the beginnings of life are always important. So it's fascinating to me, the premature. There's so many threads because you're an author. The storytelling piece. Everybody, Robert tells me he's premature. You heard that, 29 weeks, and I think I was premature about the same. And in fact, a similar background story. I was born in the UK, immigrated here. Is it hard uprooting and moving from one country to the other, especially at a young age? Do you remember that?
I don't really have many memories of England. The only one I have is I've got this memory of this image. It's an image. It's like a still image of my grandmother climbing up on the table in the kitchen because a mouse was running around. But when I went back as an adult, and I went back to that home. There were houses in a row sort of thing, and I was able to sort of go, that was the house, like,
Wow.
and no. So, something had sucked. So obviously I did recognize that, and yeah.
Do you remember that because of the mouse or because of the house?
I don't know, because I couldn't see the kitchen from the outside, but I certainly knew which one it was.
You trigger every time you say something. My mind goes on a journey. So another author friend of mine wrote a children's book called Mouse in the House. I'll have to connect you to that one.
Yeah.
Now you've got something exciting that we're going to talk about today. Hold it up there. You've written or published a book. Can you just tell us the title? Read it out there.
So this is Sovereign Assassin. So this is my novel. It's a novel about an assassin who, because she has sovereign immunity, can't be prosecuted, and as a result winds up getting her own reality TV show as she prepares for her next kill.
Thank you. You can put that down now. We'll bring it back on screen. Everybody, I'm just going to brag. You can see on screen here. Look I got one too. And what's so wonderful is authors, they sometimes will do this, and you can see Robert's put a thank you. And this is all the way from Australia. So I treasure this. It'll be on my thing here now. I've written a review for the book, and I'll surprise you later about the rating. But everyone, this is a right turn for me because I usually read nonfiction, and I'm fascinated by people who write fiction or novels, only because I think it's genius. I have trouble even thinking about being that creative. So let's go back for a minute, and I want to bring you into something called Plato's Garden. Are you ready for that?
Sure.
It's a new segment on the show. I just started doing my doctoral degree at University in London, a little shameless plug, Middlesex University. And
hey, I'm all for doctoral degrees. I'm doing one myself. So
there you go. And the reason why we're doing this is part of what I'm learning is I'm learning to think differently. And so I decided after talking to my professor that I want to bring this on the show. And while I'm doing the degree over a couple of years, meet interesting people like you and see if we can have some fun with it. So I'm just going to bring something up on the screen and add it to the page. So let's just see if we can. All right, now we'll edit and clean all this up because we are live streaming. This won't be the final broadcast, but tell me if you can see that on screen. It's a picture of your book.
Can.
Yep. All right. So I'm going to count backwards from 3, and then I'm going to lead you into Plato's Garden, and then we're just going to have some conversation. So stand by. Just keep yourself quiet for a moment. Making sure it. Get rid of something on the screen here. All right, stand by. In 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome everyone. The special segment we're doing here today with our guest Robert New, is an author of the book Sovereign Assassin. Now, Robert, you can see something on the screen there. I'm just going to advance it for our guests. And back in these times, Plato's Garden was a place where Aristotle and Plato and others would go, and they would basically do some of their deep reflective thinking. And there's a lot of history around Plato's Garden. Somewhere outside of Greece, apparently. There's some really neat fictional pictures of it. But let me get you a little definition, and you can see this on the screen. If you're listening to the audio, you won't be able to see it, everyone. What we have is a picture of the garden, or what it would look like. Plato, 427 BC to 347 BC. He was an Athenian philosopher during the classical period in ancient Greece, and the founder of the Platonist school of thought and the academy. And that's where the word academia, which is fascinating, is the very first institution of higher learning in the Western world. So, Robert, one of the things that we do is I'm doing a transdisciplinary doctoral, which means this is the way my professor said. She said, Tom, people from business, and I'm an executive from business, we don't do this very well. We're more black and white thinkers and maybe a little bit of gray. Neuroscience, I'm a fan of that. Our brains are going fast all the time. We really don't stop to reflect. And I know you know a lot of this. So do you see the 3 words at the bottom there, knowing, being, and doing?
Yes.
We spend a lot of time doing. So what we are now in your work as an author and everything you're going to talk about, you're always in that general state of doing. But what we're going to do in Plato's Garden is we're going to explore the knowing and the being. So what's behind some of the work that you're doing? We're going to have some fun. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And we're going to call this the influences of context. And there's 3 questions. we'll just go through each one and be very casual about it, but just see if it invokes some thought. So let me get you to read the first question out loud, Robert. So if you can just read that as it is.
So this is for macro. What was happening in the world around you that may have influenced your public works?
Yeah, so let me give you some context. It can go back to as early as childhood, and we know a lot of part about the brain gets populated with thoughts, emotion, things, and that a lot of times does shape us. But go back as far as you want, but just talk to us about, what was going on in the world when you started thinking about getting into what you do today.
So just in terms of writing or in terms of the book or?
Well, where you were before. So prior to being an author and that shift that you made, we haven't learned about what you did before leading up to that point, but what was going on in the world? Just don't talk about the book and the details of yourself and your work, but what was going in the macro world at that time over that period? It could be 10 years, could be 15 years, could be 5 years.
Well, I had, say we moved when I was a child, sort of grew up through that, kind of, not because of that. I think just because I was, one of the youngest in my year level at school, and wasn't particularly athletic. I never really quite felt like I sort of fit in. I always sort of felt like I should either be the year above for like the work or the year below for the social, and so it was kind of. But then through towards the end of my high school, so high school in Australia, that's sort of, I'm not sure how it translates to other countries, but the pre-university, that was, I started martial arts, and that kind of broadened my social world, but really changed me as a person. So I wound up becoming more coordinated. I wound up having a lot of, because I was seeing the same people, 3 times a week, made really great friends, many of whom I'm still friends with and see regularly today. And that really sort of then helped with my confidence, with me as a person, meant that I was felt confident to interact with people, that obviously the biggest thing for me, so it was also how I met my wife. So
there's always a silver lining.
there was that too. So it was, so that really sort of helped. And then, that sort of way of thinking, and I had some really great friends who were big into philosophy, like martial art philosophy.
Yeah.
How old
were you back? How old were you then?
So we're talking 16, 17 is when I started.
Yep.
And trained for 17 straight years at that point, and then gave it up for a few years when my son was born, because we moved from Perth back to Melbourne, and where we moved to was quite a distance from where we used to train, so we wound up stopping training, and just time-wise, we just didn't have the same amount of time as we used to. But then wound up, my daughter wanted to do some training, so we started back up, and I trained for another couple of years, fairly ad hoc, but with another group locally that was based on the same style. And so but then I've had to, then COVID hit, and that was kind of the end of it, and haven't really gone back. So
sure.
One day I'd like to, but I'm doing a PhD now, so it's sort of takes up too much time.
Yeah, it'd be kind of fun to do some kind of a virtual get you back on to teach us karate virtually. It'd be kind of fun. All right, everybody, we're here in Plato's Garden. It's just the exercise we're doing to, instead of focusing on the being, what we do generally as human beings, we're being in our lives, what we know. It's digging deeper into the knowing, what's behind, and the doing. The thing about this type of discussion we're looking for here is threads. When we start looking behind what we're doing and compare it through other disciplines, we start looking for threads that may have shaped or informed the transitions we made in our life. That's what we're really trying to find out here. Is you're a guy, just to play this back, who, your profile says I'm working on my 7th degree. and somebody like me goes, wow, that's incredible. I mean, most people maybe one, and you come from this part of the world, and then you moved, and then you shifted back, but you didn't always write books. You went and
No.
studied karate and things like that. So we kind of get a sense for what was going on in the macro world. Let's go to question 2. I'm going to read that one out loud. The word mezzo. This is basically what was happening in your industry, whatever you were doing in your industry. And I think you just talked about it as basically the running the dojo. What was happening in the industry at that time where you were that influenced you to make the shift? Because I'm assuming that dojos didn't go out of business, but maybe there were some reasons why. And then when we get to the third question, I want to talk deeply about yourself. So let's just focus on the industry during that 16 or 20 years that you were running the dojo. What was happening?
Yes, I ran a dojo in Perth for about 4.5 years.
Yeah.
But it basically ended because we moved back to Melbourne. So my wife is a mining engineer, and so we moved to Perth to follow the mining boom that was occurring then. And then when we had our son and all our families in Melbourne, so parents were my parents and her parents were less than thrilled that their grandchild was on the other side of the country. And Australia's a big country, so it's like 4 hour flight just to
It
get
is.
from Melbourne to Perth.
Yeah.
So we used to love that because we had some of our friends from Holland, where my parents were then telling them that friends, my relatives in Holland, were then sort of saying like, oh, so how long does it take to drive from Melbourne to Perth? And my my mum had to explain that it's not like hours. It's not even it's days or a week to drive. It's like 3 or 4 days minimum to drive that distance.
Hey, that sounds
And
like rush hour. That sounds like rush hour in some of the big cities in the world now.
yes, yeah. So that was sort of when we sort of moved back to Melbourne. That dojo, well, we closed down, but had a really great time there. And so that was again made some friends through that we're still in contact with. But also I had one student who came in who had Down syndrome. And that was a really interesting thing for me, was to train someone who with different levels of ability to do things, but also really rewarding. And she'd seen martial art movies and gotten into it. So she came along with her mother and had that wonderful experience of grading them to
Wow.
their first belt and everything. And it was
I
really
think
fun.
so you kind of touched my heart there, man, because part of my storyline is I have a daughter who's 25 in university, other side of Canada. I miss her. She's coming home for Christmas, which is great. And 25 years ago, we had our first son on the way, and he was serious down, so he didn't make it past term. And I always sometimes reflect. I see people who raise Down children. I have a lot of people who I know who have autistic children, Down syndrome. It's amazing to me what the parents' commitment is. So I think it's a testament to you, and certainly in the dojo and teaching. What's one thing that you can share with us, that one experience of teaching those children with what you had in in karate that benefited them or that influenced or shaped them?
I think it was for me, like what they got out of it was a bit more confidence. What they really wanted to do was learn a kata, like that sequence of movements, because in martial art movies there's always the time when sort of the hero shown, usually one of the early scenes, they're shown doing some training and those forms or movements, that sort of set sequence of things, which later on usually is then shown like those sequence of movements that seemed like just a sequence of movements actually was really effective later on. And so she really just wanted to learn a kata, and so was with us for, I think it was about a year. But we got through
That's cool.
a couple of katas, which was a lot of fun. But more recently I've also worked as a STEM specialist in a primary school that's for special ed. And so worked 2 days a week, but then trying to engage very high needs.
Yeah.
But also really, like, many of them were nonverbal. Many of them were IQs below 50. So we're talking like really high needs. And so it was, that was really interesting then as well as an experience to try and engage students. And on the flip side, I've also taught at, I'm now teaching at university, but the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where you're going from high achieving. I've taught in the International Baccalaureate program, which in Australia is it's usually run. It's self-selected students go into it, and so like you're getting like the best students from the best schools go into that program, and they're doing a 2-year academically rigorous program. So I've done like a complete spectrum of of needs and
well, that's great. So Robert, this is great. We'll continue. I think you're doing really well with this segment. Everybody, we're here with the author, Robert New. Robert, I'm going to full screen you. Hold up that book and just read the title out. His new book.
So this is Sovereign Assassin. Yes,
Okay.
ebook and audio book out now too.
Oh, hey, I didn't know that because I have
it's brand new.
Gosh, well, it's funny because I was I have bragging rights. Everyone, I have a signed copy, and you'll have to get one. But I'm going to make a shout out to everybody now. Listen, authors, you know this. I'm a published author too, Robert. Our work's not known until our fans read our books. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, everyone, a couple times on the show is get the book, read it. It's a wonderful book. We'll talk more about it in detail soon. And go to Amazon or Goodreads, wherever Robert wants you to, but post a review. The reviews are read, and it gets the bookstores excited about it. It gets the other fans excited. What we're doing was we're in Plato's Garden. Plato's Garden, just exploring what's behind this man. So we started off with his bio, and if you don't mind, Rob, I'm going to catch the audience up. We started off with a bio about this guy who's come from another country, or from moved to England, back to Perth, or back to Australia. I had a son. We heard a little bit about his wife. We heard about the dojo and all these things going on. And then there was a thread in there which fascinates me about the education piece. The word that keeps coming up is confidence too. And I know when I was growing up as a kid and I raised my wife's 2 boys, there's my stepsons, I didn't quite understand the power of martial arts in teaching confidence and teaching discipline. I always looked at it in a way that was different. So let's get into the last question there, Robert. I want you to read that one out loud.
What was happening in your personal life that may have influenced your public works?
So let me lead you a little bit on this one, because we've in the other 2 questions, some of it kind of seeped out into the room. That and maybe this would be a good point in time to talk about that phobia or that fear that you have in your bio. So what I'm really interested in is there's a lot of educator here. So there's a guy, Robert, here, who's an educator. And you talked about, just looking at my notes here, you talked about special ed, and you seem to have a gift of being able to work with those. You talked about teaching through karate. So talk to us about what was going on in your personal life, but also I'm interested in your childhood. Who shaped you? Was confidence an issue that you struggled with yourself? And then tell us about that phobia. Just give us a sense about you and how that affected your life.
Yeah, so look, I was certainly, when I was younger, I did lack in confidence, particularly social confidence. As I say, I didn't feel like I fit in with where I was, either socially or around with other people. And
Can I ask you a question? Can I just ask you a question? Sorry, because that thread's right there.
Yeah.
We're not born with that, but generally our brains are populated through thoughts and emotions of influences around us. Was there moments or things that you recall that created that feeling of not fitting in?
Not really. I couldn't say what caused. I can't think of a particular incident where where there was like it wasn't like I had a particular issue, say with a bully or something, which
Yeah.
therefore I didn't want to participate and sort of withdrew. No, it just, I think it was just within me. Like, so that sort of then led to mental health issues sort of through my adolescence,
Tell us
which
about that.
martial arts, well, just from sort of, again, just feeling out of place, that sort of
Yeah.
existential angst, which really affected me. But through that, it it sort of gave me, through that sort of deep self-exploration and trying to work out who I am, where do I fit in with, life, the universe, and everything. How do I become like, how do I contribute? How do I do all these sort of, how do I, be a better person? And it sort of then through martial arts, that was really good for me. It got me out of the house, got me socially. As I say, I was interacting with people more regularly. I wound up meeting my wife through that, so that certainly helped with a lot with things. And through that, but also just through the training, literally burning up stress hormones through the training, which helps reduce sort of things. The extra confidence from knowing that, if there was a confrontation with pretty much, anyone, that, it wouldn't be necessarily like I would be able to respond, and that I wouldn't. And that gives you a certain confidence when you're interacting with people, that that you can handle yourself. So that when I'm not afraid to talk to people and see how it goes. But I mean, and I still, I suppose, had a sense of nagging imposter syndrome that do I really fit in, do I belong, and that kind of that hasn't gone away, that's still there. But it's really interesting because I literally just yesterday was talking to a colleague. I've only been in this workplace for 6 months, and someone mentioned imposter syndrome, and I was like, oh, I've got that so badly. And they're like, but you always seem so confident, and they seemed really surprised that I professed this sort of imposter syndrome. But I think it's sort of all come through that, and through sort of the studies that, and through study of people, like throughout my various degrees and things. The common thread is that it's really getting a better understanding of human nature and humanity. And so when you, either at the physiological level or through to the self or the social, like so like I've sort of covered all those things in various bits, but that sort of then has led to a lot more self-confidence, much better mental health and resilience, which has been a really big thing. And I mean, you're talking about Plato's garden. I was quite like Aristotle, and so his notion of like the meaning of life is to flourish. But through, obviously in that version, it's through the virtues, and going the median. Virtue is the median between two extremes. But that notion, how I've flourished, how I've actually developed me as a person, is through study. That's my thing. That's no one else has to do that. It doesn't bother me if I've got people study or not. But that's what works for me. For other people, it might be a particular hobby or whatever that they're exploring that makes them to refine and feel like they're developing. Might be just through hobby. So various sort of things they do. But for me, it's always sort of been study. And when I complete a degree, I stop for a year or two, have a break, and then I get an itch. I'm just sort of like, I'm not moving in there. That's where the PhD is sort of amazing. As I'm sure you're aware, you mentioned yourself that it's changing your thinking. That's what I've really loved about my degree, is that I've gone from being a sort of a hardcore scientist, science is fact, science is truth, to I'm doing my methodology is called phenomenology, which is a qualitative research method that basically takes like through interview data, and then I'm trying to interpret it
Yeah.
through look at themes that emerge from that, but takes a view that meaning is personally constructed, and that is actually worthy of study just as much as an empirical scientific fact. And so it's quite a different kind of view, and trying to capture that experience that people have and work out the essences. So
I think it's
so it's been a real shift in thinking, which I've loved.
I love that. Yeah, you just triggered something. There's a local stage here where I did my first TED Talk, and their theme is a shift in thinking. And when somebody like yourself, who's I call a thought leader, so you lead the world through stories, through sharing thoughts, that if I believe that if you can influence me with just one story or one single thought, and that can shift my thinking, it could make my life better. I'm amazed. So everybody, the reason why we do Plato's Garden, and first of all, Robert, have you enjoyed this segment, the Plato's
Very
Garden?
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we come from, we get bios of guests coming in the show, and when I use this segment, it's pardon the way of saying this, but it's like we turn you inside out. And this is what I want people to learn about how wonderful Robert is. And I'm going to honor you, Robert, is that you're so transparent, but you've got such courage to turn yourself inside out and do that. Thinking, not just about being, but knowing and doing what's behind it. I just want to capture a couple things. I mean, what came out through this was the word confidence, you being an educator, and certainly also your experience teaching, Down syndrome and other students who needed special education. But then we went back and you told us about your confidence, and what I really like is you tried to identify the emotions and the experiences you had, but you're a seeker. So that's classic hero's journey. So you went seeking. Why am I not feeling confident in myself? Why do I have this imposter syndrome? Why? What I've found is, and I've struggled most of my life from my own childhood. Most people know my background and story as a executive leader. So mostly a CEO most of my career, transformed. I went through the same curve, and it comes from my early childhood, although mine was just rife with terrible stuff. But it was wired into my unconscious patterns that even if I was succeeding, I was pushing away success, and I couldn't quite accept it. And I really didn't know who I was. And I went seeking and doing a little bit of, not 7 degrees, but a lot of what you've talked about. Did you know that through neuroscience, I learned that the dopamine system, which is the reward system, that learning new things creates that little hits of dopamine. It's like,
Yep.
I'm going to learn something exciting. Wow. And that helps with mental health. I had a concussion in 2018 and a brain injury, and I'm much better now, but I slipped into depression and anxiety. So I honor you sharing that. And I like to say to people, I live well with mental illness because, as you know, anxiety, especially generalized anxiety, things like that, most people have it, but it's always something you have to live and work with. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you've chosen ways of working through that, and it's fascinating.
Well, that's where I've really, with my and I know I just sort of realized I didn't actually answer your question about my phobia, but
tell us about your phobia.
Well, before that, like just what you're saying. So my PhD, I'm looking at how teachers experience leadership and how it affects them at work, but also in their personal lives at home.
Cool.
But I'm analyzing that through an attachment theory lens.
Oh.
But then in going into attachment theory, what I really look like when you go right back to the origins of it and where it sort of came from, how it was developed, interesting things is that it sort of kind of reveals a lot about us and why humans are prone to things like anxiety and things like that. So when you go back a few hundred, even just a few hundred years, we go back a few thousand years. We weren't the dominant species. We were mid-tier sort of thing. But then we rapidly moved to the top of the tree. But when we were mid-tier, we needed a strong fear system. Like that was protective for us, that enabled us to survive. We then rapidly moved to the top, but we moved too quickly for us to evolve where that system was switched off. And so as a species, we have an overactive stress response in general. And so it's too easily triggered. And so now we get stress response from, things that are basically benign, and so many people won't respond to the same thing the same way, but will be triggered by it, and we keep getting that sort of stress response because we moved up so quickly, and so now we need to find a way to mitigate that. And that's where I've also been really fascinated with studies around fearlessness in particular. So there's actually, I think she's a Canadian woman, SM046 is the sort of designation she has in the research, but she's literally biologically fearless. And like her amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain, you're like the neuroscience, when she was 12 turned to bone, so like calcified, and so due to a genetic condition, so and so she's biologically fearless, and it's has really interesting implications, many of which relate to sort of stuff we've already been talking about, like confidence. She's described as sort of I'm okay, you're okay attitude. It's kind of happy-go-lucky, but a really strong theory of mind, like really able to empathy and tell what other people are thinking, with the exception of fear. She has a complete blind spot for it herself. Yeah. So she can't recognize a fearful face. She can't, draw one, but she then also doesn't recognize when she's causing discomfort, that kind of discomfort in people. Yes. So she'd be, move in too close, and lots of stuff.
Big blind spots.
Yeah,
that's an incredible story. I'm glad you brought it up. Everybody, we're here with the author of the book, Sovereign Assassin. Robin, hold up the book again there. We're going to give it another look. It's a beautiful book, and keep it up there. I'm going to do stereo. I got mine too.
Yep.
Okay. I've read it. I'm going to announce it in a little while, a review. But why we're having these conversations, if you just joined us, we came out of Plato's Garden and talking about sort of a deeper meaning behind Robert's work. So, he was a teacher, educator, transformed into a writer. He's told us he's done 7 degrees. The part you said about the fear, you're on your 7th. I lost count. The part you said about the fear, that's interesting. We can maybe bring you back, talk about that. But there's a lot of preaching that goes on in the world about, got to do it in fear and be fearless. But I think you're right, because you see in the background, by the way, in my studio, I have a little human brain, which is a replica I bought, and I took it apart when I was trying to, through neuroplasticity, by the way, I rewired my brain. I couldn't walk straight. I couldn't balance. My vestibular was broken. I still have double vision and photophobia. And so I've gone through intense learning about the brain and actually created new pathways, Robert. The thing that I started, learning about the amygdala and the stress management system is that there's another topic I stumbled on through my own learning about maltreatment. And you and I can talk offline more about this, but it's part of my doctoral. Maltreatment is where I began, and what the research that's there shows that a child's brain, when it experiences maltreatment doesn't have to be violence or anything. It could be as simple as mommy and daddy always busy and they ignore me, so you develop this feeling that you're not good enough. But maltreatment actually affects the way the stress system is developed in the brain. And you said about this woman having a blind spot, not being able to see fear. It took me all my life. And seriously, I'm 59 years old, but it took me to 2018 having my brain injury to understand why, especially as a business leader back in my career, why when I see the outside world, Robert, things happening around me, what's coming in, it's triggering inside of me is a completely different picture. So I would experience people in a room, and it would trigger me seeing danger, monsters, people raising their voices, and I would melt into this emotional puddle. This is all part of that, what you've been talking to us about in part there, about the development of the brain. Let's shift gears now, and we're going to leave Plato's Garden. We're going to give you a little bit of an applause there. If you've ever gone into a bookstore and heard an author read, it's a fascinating thing. I'm not sure if you've done any author readings, but we're going to have you read to us, and I'm going to full screen you. So tell me when you're ready. I've asked Robert to read a page or two out of his book so we can capture his voice and just experience his emotion. Robert, you can hold it up so we can see it as you read, or if you want, whatever you want. I'm just going to full screen you. Okay.
Yep.
So when you're ready, I'm going to full screen you. So you tell me when you're set, and I'll go 3, 2, 1, and then we'll get you to do a quick reading from the book.
Well, you're probably going to like this because it does go into a little bit of mythology. So,
Okay.
Greek mythology, which you might like.
I love it.
Yeah,
So
I'm ready when.
okay, so we're live streaming everybody across social media. This is not the actual production, so we'll clean this up. Robert, when you when I say 3, 2, 1, and I give it to you, if you could give us the context about
Yes.
it, like you said, and then just read to us at your own pace. Everybody, just take this in and experience live the magic of Robert New, who's the author of this book and does wonderful work. So when you're ready, you ready?
Yep.
All right. And when you're done, by the way, just put your thumb up so I know to bring me back on screen. So everybody, 3, 2, 1. Robert New, we're with him in the Quiet Warrior Show live, and he's going to do a reading out of his book, Sovereign Assassin. Robert?
So this is basically the start early in chapter 2. So at the start of the novel, my main character Niobe, who is a princess at the start but is soon to become queen, her father has just died, and so she has been spending the last decade plus of her life, a couple of decades of her life, training to kill the person who's got ultimately responsible for her father's death. So her father has just died from a long battle with cancer that was caused by someone else. And so we now meet her in the palace, has a central courtyard with a garden in it, and that's where we find her. So that evening, Niobe sat into the fountain in the internal, sat gazing into the fountain in the internal garden of the palace. Niobe loved its ornate marble sculpture. It depicted a scene of Echo falling in love with Narcissus, which was based on a painting by Poussin, which, unlike other such paintings, had Eros, better known by his Roman name Cupid, playing a role in the tragic story. In the myth, Echo fell in love with Narcissus, who had already fallen in love with his own mirror image. Narcissus spent his days gazing at his reflection in the water of a pond, while Echo slowly faded away, leaving only her voice behind. Niobe often pondered each character's perspective in the painting and fountain. She liked the idea that the tragic story was caused by a mischievous Eros. Today, all she could think about was that she was Echo, in love with something she could never have, although in her case, it was her father's support for killing Alban being denied. The noise of a door opening made her look up. Niobe watched Gethin approach. It was clear he'd come to find her. His hazel eyes were red with grief. "How'd you find me?" Niobe asked hoarsely, an effect achieved by screaming in frustration under the water of the fountain several times over the last hour. "I knew I'd find you here. It's where you come when you're upset," Gethin said. "Usually that's with you. I always have your best interest at heart. Yet you won't address the elephant in the room. We'll get to that. How are you feeling?" "Like my heart's been ripped out, except I can still feel it convulsing in my chest." Gethin nodded. "Me too. He was a great king and an even better man." "I mean because I can't plunge a spear hand into Alban's side and rip out his intestines. It aches." Niobe tapped her heart. "I know you love Dad." Gethin took a deliberate breath. "If you're my surrogate daughter like he was my older brother, if he chose you to educate me, he must have felt similarly about you," Niobe said. "I'm pleased you understand." Niobe took a last look at water spouting from Eros's arrow onto Echo, which then bounced from Narcissus into the pool. Niobe decided she wouldn't be left as a hollow voice. She wanted to be Eros, the one manipulating events, the one in charge. She turned to look Gethin in the eye. "There's no way I'm going to abandon my revenge for this. Alban stole my father's life the day before he achieved his life's goal." Niobe knew her anger was writ large upon her face. "You're upset, understandably, but this is a time for mourning, not revenge. I want you to help me kill Alban."
All right, we're going to bring me back on screen there. All right, I'm going to give a virtual applause for Robert. Let's put the audience back. First of all, put the audience in the journey. What's the experience like when you're reading to your fans, reading to people?
I feel like a little weird sort of doing but it's actually a really important process as an author to read your work. And very recently, I've actually released. I was on a podcast called Catch the Story, where I actually read my first audiobook, if you like. It's a single story, short story, only a couple thousand words, but it was my first time sort of recording myself and releasing it as an audio file for a story rather than the written form.
Wow.
And so it was really fascinating to, like, again, hear the rhythms of the narrative and how it sort of flowed. It helps you pick up mistakes reading out loud a lot more. But I find that it can also reveal a little bit more about character, and that's been actually really interesting in the development of the audiobook for Sovereign Assassin, where I'm working with a narrator, or worked with a narrator, Jessica Duncan, to bring it to life. And hearing someone else read your work is also really fascinating. Because they bring their own performance, their own spin on things, and that's been awesome. And so I've really loved, like, she's done a really great job with the narration, and that's literally filtering through to online sites as we speak. So I think it's currently at about 8, but
Congratulations, everybody. We're with Robert New again. He's the author of the book Sovereign Assassin, and he just read us from the book, so you'll have to come back and listen or watch this in the broadcast. The audiobook, is it available now? I can go get it?
Yes. Yep.
Beautiful.
So it's still, let's say it takes a few weeks to sort of filter through to the online site. So it's where it filters through, it's for sale. So it's throughout many of the major retailers already. It'll probably reach Amazon in another week's time.
Okay.
From where it's at, but
awesome.
Like in terms of Audible, but otherwise, it is everywhere. So it's on Spotify, it's on it's through Barnes and Noble, through Chirp, through all sorts of places.
Yeah, I think the Audible is where I tend to get my audiobooks, which is wonderful. I just put it up there, audible.com. And everybody, if you don't know, I'm not an agent for Audible. If you first book an Audible, it's complimentary, and then you can choose to stay on monthly. The interesting thing, especially with my vision changes, and I don't want the audience to think I'm blind here, although it's, I'm running a studio of complex equipment, so it really is challenging my character, and I love this. Talk about doing things in fear, and you bring out the best of me, Robert, so I really appreciate that. I listen to 2-3 audiobooks a month now, and I'm getting a university degree just in my car. And, I read some research a long time ago. I can't say whether it's factual or not, that you can, by reading, you can effectively almost get the equivalent of a university degree. What I chose to do is I came out of my home, because it was a broken home with an addicted father. I became homeless when I was 12, but I didn't go to university right away. I went into business, and I was doing education on other people's money. So I would go and and there's a book called Think and Grow Rich out there by Napoleon Hill that actually pokes a hole a bit in the education philosophy. And sort of to all of those who can't get their degrees, there's nothing wrong with that, everybody.
Absolutely, like as I said, like that's just my me studying it's just my particular thing.
Yeah. Well, where I was going with that is, if I had a particular focus in my job, I would say to my boss, okay, what are the skills and things I need to learn? I would go and find education on demand. So I'd research and I'd take courses. So eventually I got my degrees and things, but I really love how you've taught us that you can weave the education into your writing. And I think that's fascinating because I find your book very rich, and I really like that. I want to ask you a couple of questions about the writing of it, as we're getting to about 10 minutes left on the show. I have no idea, and I think you're going to mentor me, hopefully, if I'll let you do that one sometime too, because I wanted to write my first novel. I really think it's something I got to do. But how the heck do you come up with names like Niobe and the concepts? So let me put it together in a little bundle of questions so you can address it, and I'll be quiet. One is, I'm curious, where do you go to write? Some people, do you go to the Outback? Do you sit in your little office? Two, what's your process, for your creative process, in terms of for coming up with names of characters, the actual storyline? Because this one is like, I was thinking, I'll let you answer that, and then I'll come back to something else. So go ahead.
Yeah, so this, I mean, obviously the storyline in this is a bit different, but it
bit.
was very much, yeah, it's very much
A queen who's an assassin.
it was very much a product of its time. So this was, I had long service leave, which in Australia, when you've worked for a company for a number of years, you basically get bonus holiday.
Yep.
And so I went up, because I was working in education, I went up having a full term off from teaching, which was just, a wonderful, wonderful thing. But that's when I basically wrote the bulk of this book, and it was 2019 when I did most of the writing, and very much it's a product of its time, where you had certain presidential candidates saying they could stand in Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and not lose any votes. This was my very tongue-in-cheek, satirical kind of response. Well, how far could you take it? It was like, it was meant to be kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's amazing how much even since the time of writing, with other stuff that's gone on, how much of what seemed really sort of far-fetched, like people voting to allow this to occur, is actually kind of coming through in the modern world of, actually that's not such an absurd thing. And it's kind of scary for me, because this was, I don't approve of the Niobe's actions or anything else, but it wound up, but that's where sort of the idea came from. And then the character names and things, often the character names have some meaning, so I'll look at characters from mythology and bring that in. Niobe, I think I just liked the name and sort of the implication of it, but then within the book you also have Ebony, and Ebony is almost Niobe spelt backwards. Okay. So that's sort of where it's not, it was.
What about Gathan? What about Gathan?
Gethin? That was just Gethin. I kind of had I just liked it as a name. I was basically trying to, because I created this fictional European country, I wanted sort of these names that weren't necessarily, fully anglicized or fully, typical sort of names. And so I came up with it once, although, Gethin is I think a Welsh name, but so it sort of drew from that. Niobe, you might not sort of get in as a Western name as much. The other character names, some of them are just purely satirical, like Queen Marigold, like Queen Marigold's from like Little Princess, I think, because I had young children, and that was the show we used to watch, and so it's just, so there's some sort of tongue in cheek. And Dahlia, was because of the Black Dahlia murders, and she becomes a dark character for a bit in the story, and that's probably grossly unfair to the circumstance around where that name came from. But that was kind of where I kind of drew it from. So in the start, she's presented in light colored clothing and everything else, but then as she comes in through the novel, her clothing gets progressively darker, sort of representing her journey. But so that's sort of where those sort of names came from.
That's very interesting. I'm just going to put my other camera on the screen here so people can see me in the studio. I've got Robert's book, and I didn't know that the audiobook was available. I'm glad, and I'll probably grab that just to support you.
It's literally went on sale like 5 days ago. So
no problem.
And,
so
and
what
it's still filtering through. Yeah.
Thank you. And what I do is I find, like that fearless thing. I find my way around things. It's a new normal. I use a screen reading app. And what I had prepared here was to share screen with you. And actually, there's a favorite passage in the book. I won't do it because you've read about. If I remember it, it's about where Niobe is. There's a murder. A murder's just, or she's just killed somebody, and there's a camera, and there's investigators involved. You remember that scene, right?
Yeah.
And I read it, and I went, "Holy shit!" It's like, are you kidding me? A queen, and you brought. Like, what happened? What happens to? I mean, what do you want when you're writing? As you write, are you thinking, what do I want Tom to think and feel? Or do you just write it from your own perspective?
Well, what really inspires my writing is typically is I read a science article about some quirky aspect of science that I go, that's a really cool idea.
Oh
I'm going to
boy.
base a story around it. So typically that's what I write about.
Yeah.
Or a few ideas sort of come together in links. So one of my books is called Insight, and that's basically just,
Hmm.
what if TV shows or movies like Limitless or Lucy,
Yeah.
or where there's like, a growth mindset and, what if you unleash, or what if instead of it being a pill that made someone smarter, there was an actual course of work? And then how would you actually
I
develop
see.
that? And so
Very
that in
cool.
that book, the reader gets to experience that growth journey too, because I actually created my own intelligence raising program and then put it into narrative form. And so
That's
that's
cool.
typically what I do. And so with the Sovereign Assassin, there's a lot of philosophy in there, martial art philosophy. You should see the stack of books that I had,
Hmm.
that informed the writing of this. So I'd obviously trained in martial arts for
Yeah.
20 odd years.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just training in, it was also absorbing the lore and the history
Yeah.
around that. And so, I bring in many of the, famous martial art texts into Sovereign Assassin that I'd read, many philosophical texts, many things around, ethics and morality. So,
Yep.
Kohlberg and Lawrence Kohlberg sort of, moral standards come in, and moral development, and his sort of stage theory around that. So, and even within that, I put in stuff to amuse me. So, like at the start, I had like Niobe's goes from level 6 in the palace to level 4, where she meets Dahlia, because she's going from a level 6 level of moral development to Dahlia's fourth level. And so that was just my little quirky sort of thing that I put in. But there's all sorts of, so really just I use it as a way, kind of, my writing process is usually to process ideas.
Mm,
And to put it into some form of sequence, or to see where it could go.
I see.
So typically when I'm writing, it's also to educate and inform others. Like, here's this nifty idea. I'm using it in a narrative form, but it is actually based on real stuff. So throughout this, you'll get things where I say, research shows, and
Yep.
that's real research. That's real
I see.
studies. Occasionally, it's my own personal
Yep.
story comes in there. So,
Sure.
when Niobe's reflecting upon her poor teacher teaching about fixed action patterns, and so that's based on my own experience in the classroom teaching a class. So fixed action patterns are things that animals use to as part of a mating ritual, but they're commonly called FAP, like abbreviated to FAP, which is a slang term for masturbation, which I had no clue about. Like, so I was teaching a class, and I had, like, my front row was just losing their mind through the whole lesson, and I had no clue what was going on. And at the end of it, like, and these were normally like the good students in the front, and they were just, and at the end, they kind of just went, Urban Dictionary, sir, Urban Dictionary. and so I looked it up, and then I was just mortified at what I'd been saying. Like, humans don't have haps, and humans don't do this. And and it was just, And then
That's funny.
I don't know how I'd missed that term, but somehow I just had picked up that was a thing. And so that sort of gets in there. So some of it's drawn from my own life, but mostly it's just,
Yeah.
here's a really cool idea. Let's see how I can link it together and put it in narrative form.
Well, I honor that. Everybody, Robert New, the author of several books, but Sovereign Assassin. We've got the stock ticker on the screen there, robertsnew.com. The interesting thing is, I read business books, but I'm starting to read novels, and it reminded me. I just went on a journey in my head, Robert, that there was I get bored reading books, and part of it was I didn't realize until I started learning about my own deficiencies in the way I think. I think I'm a little bit dyslexic in that I have to visualize and see, but I remember reading a book by Robert Lencioni, Patrick Lencioni, I think was the author, called the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I think that was the title. What I'm getting at is he would write business stories, but write them as fables. And I remember picking one up,
Yep.
and I zipped through it. And then when I started public speaking and did my first TED Talk, I was told to get the book by the CEO of TED, Chris Anderson. And that's when I started realizing about the power of narrative storytelling. And I don't have
Yep.
to preach to you, but everybody, what I've learned is there's two. I don't know if you're familiar with Paul Zach's work, Dr. Paul Zach, and you and I should talk because you might want to get to know him.
Yeah.
Paul Zach is sort of like one of the gurus around measuring cortisol, measuring the impact of narrative, and he's developed some in his lab. He's developed some. Let's see if I say this right. Some algorithms, and there's a new app that he's been out for a few years, and I'm working directly with him through some of my neuroscience stuff, and it tracks actually cortisol and oxytocin. So actually, it's his whole work, and he's written a book called Immersion, and it's so in the narrative of storytelling. Everyone, there's a protagonist, like we have Robert had written his book about Niobe, and then cortisol is not a bad thing. It's stress, right? But it makes us really lean in and be alert. But there's stress, and then along comes hope, and in the story when there's hope, which is kind of like happy endings, or at least things that make us feel okay, there's good coming. Oxytocin, which those two chemicals in storytelling are the key ones he's measured over his lifetime that really impact people's ability to build trust. And so when I'm reading your book, Robert, that's what's happening to me is I'm going through this roller coaster. And what's interesting is I've got that app. It's not a pitch for the app, but that app I was telling you about, it's called Best Tuesday Ever. I've got it on my phone. And as I was reading your book, I only started playing with this app. It's showing me real time live because it's tracking the neurons in my brain, dopamine things. It's showing me this 2 lines: safety and immersion. And it's fascinating reading books and seeing how that happens. So I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to neuroscience. I'm certified in that area, but I'm really thrilled, everyone, to hear such an accomplished author who talks about how he's put education and research and his own stories and creativity behind his books. It's just wonderful, and I want to recognize you now. Recognize you now with something. So we're going to put a screen back here, Robert. I'm going to just ask you to take a look on the back behind me. There's a TV screen. You see that image there? Okay, I'm going to full screen myself for a minute. So everybody, if you see that image, that's actually the award that Robert's going to get. So we'll go back here. So Robert, we'll tidy this audio up in the editing. I'm in my studio. So I wrote down these 4 words that without scripting them, I've never met Robert. I've read his book, but this is how the show goes. And these 4 words are really leadership, or words that define what I thought of about you. The first one's wisdom. This knowledge, the difference between knowledge and wisdom is time. And dude, you've got it with so much behind your work. The second one that comes to mind is creative. You're a very creative man, and creativity is good for mental health as well. You sent my brain on a journey reading your book. The third one is courage. And I know we talked about some things, but the courage piece comes out of you. I think the courage to step out of your comfort, the courage to be an author, the courage to come on and do podcasts, and really try to make an impact in the world is amazing. And the last one is trust. It's just something about you. It builds trust very quickly. And I don't always have that experience with guests. So we're going to induct you now into the Quiet Warrior Tribe. I'm going to get my other thing off screen. And these are handcrafted and painted. They're raised letters. The front of the coin is actually the show image, the artwork. The back of it you can't see, but it's actually the visual illustration of the hero's journey narrative. It's beautiful. And these were created in World War I, challenge coins. Have you ever heard of them?
I haven't. I have watched some podcasts though where you've mentioned it.
Yeah. So challenge, it actually comes with the creator has this little sleeve in it, and challenge coins were created in World War I, and soldiers would carry them to commit to each other, community. And what's really fascinating is they had fun with it. Officers' mess. If you didn't have your coin, you bought drinks. today they're used around the world. My father was in AA. He had his own version, first responders, community of educators. So I created this when I started the show. I didn't know what it would mean, but today we have 240 of them around the world in 17 countries of people like yourself who are become quiet warriors. That's people who take parts of their life and transform it to go out and serve others. And it's very rare. So welcome to the Quiet Warrior Tribe.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We just got somebody out in the audience there, David Sigler. Another word is interesting. There you go. That's never happened before.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. That'll go into production. But you're an interesting man,
Yeah.
according to David. I think he's somewhere in the United States. So on that note, I want to do one more thing before we let you go. Give us a lot of time. I'm going to share the screen here. See if I can pull this up. So you told me you had a phobia.
Yes. Yeah. So I have phobia for jewellery, which I know is bizarre, and it doesn't make any sense even to me. But I've had I was teaching at a girls' school and someone had lost a necklace and someone had put it on the front bench. I couldn't teach the class. I had to cover it with a sheet of paper and then I still taught from the other side of the desk, from the other side of the classroom. My daughter was young and was doing all the stuff threading things on some string, and then I'd do that with her, no problems. But then the moment she sort of tied it up and put it on as a necklace,
I shouldn't laugh because there's probably people out there who have that same phobia.
It's like I can force myself to pick up a piece of jewelry or whatever if I have to, but I sort of shudder. And it is totally irrational. It is there's no inciting incident or anything that kind of led to the development. I have no idea where it came from. It just, but it does sort of mean that when I meet someone, I always notice what they're what jewelry and stuff, and kind of become kind of fixated on it a little bit. Yes, it's just a weird little thing. It doesn't really impact my life as such. So, other than
Yeah, I'm gonna challenge you to go into Plato's garden and dig deeper behind it, because I guarantee you, with your brain there, you'll find something. I put on the screen here. It's funny because I just went and asked ChatGPT, "Hey, what does what does this phobia come from?" Can you read that? Is it too small for you?
No, I can just read it. So the fear of jewelry is known as calichiophobia or orophobia. Well, I've heard of it as cosmetophobia. Because there's also there's a NASCAR driver or something in America who's been identified with it. But psychologically they can develop due to past experiences, trauma, or conditioning. Maybe it's conditioning because the first few people I had crushes on didn't wear jewelry, and so maybe that kind of fit into
Interesting.
it. I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe that's also because when I met my wife, we met through martial arts. When you're training in martial arts, you don't wear jewelry. So that and so maybe I don't know. No, I don't know. I don't.
Yeah.
But
no, that's great. I'm going to pull that off the screen there. The reason why I added that on is, again, trying to make the show more real. We're in a world where people go to ChatGPT now, and it is is another source, and that's what came up. And what I had some fun with it, because I went, wait a minute, I looked at the cover of your book and I saw, I think about the Queen, I saw a crown, and I'm thinking jewelry.
Yes.
It's all over. So I'm wondering, as you were thinking about your book, if you were going into these mental blocks and go okay, I'm getting freaked out here.
Well, I didn't other than the crown, it's occurred to me sort of more recently that I'm trying to think all my books, and I'm now on my, although some of them are children's books, I'm now on my 10th book. I can't think I've ever mentioned a character wearing jewelry, and it's I should I write murder mysteries and stuff. I should be describing the body as having sort of that on, but I just haven't, and that's probably because I don't want to think about it.
There you go. See, there is that was a breakthrough thought. So I challenge you between now and when we have you back in the future to seeing that you're a researcher, dig deeper into that about yourself and see if you can find another thread. There's always something, a moment in time, because it's shaped in there somehow. But thanks for sharing that. I thought that was courageous. So on that note, I'm going to give it back to you to have the last word. Hold up your book again, whatever you want. Tell us where people can get a hold of you and your book.
So they get a hold of me at robertsnew.com is my website. I have a blog there also, Great Moments in Literature, which is just a series of behind the stories behind the stories, which not for my works, but just great works of literature, which is kind of a fun one. And you could also then find out about my other books there, find out about the books that I've written with my children, which are the ones that mean the most to me. So I've written some children's books, with two with my daughter and one with my son. And it's kind of been really wonderful to do.
Well, everybody, there you have it. You just touched my heart, man. Children's book. There's just so much to you. But everybody find that true passion that you see Robert New has here. Live life with some type of purpose and live the life that you deserve and desire. And Robert, will you come back again in the future?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. Everybody, I'll be posting a 5-star review for Robert's book on Amazon and Goodreads, and we'll be putting an image of it in the final production. So congratulations. And we'll see you all again, everyone, on the Quiet Warrior Show. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca.
All right, we're going to take off offline right now, so just stand by.